Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. President Biden and Congress are scrambling to prevent a nationwide railroad strike. What they're vowing to do and how we ended up here. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
President Biden has called himself a proud pro-union president, but now he's staring at a holiday season rail strike that could threaten the economy. Meeting with lawmakers today, Biden calls on Congress to block the strike by imposing a deal that some unions can get behind.
And Congress, I think, has to act to prevent it. It's not an easy call, but I think we have to do it. The economy is at risk.
A nationwide rail strike could come as early as next Friday on December 9th. And that's after union workers rejected a deal previously negotiated in September, saying it lacks pay sick days.
We had members who were forced by their employer or the railroads to stay home in quarantine without pay. Striking is the last option for us.
And the cost of the rail strike could be huge. Not only could it throw holiday shopping off the rails, it could also idle shipments of food and fuel and strand millions of travelers. The estimated economic damage, $2 billion per day. And as Biden warns that it could devastate our economy, congressional leaders are vowing to take up legislation to force the deal as soon as possible.
Again, I don't like going against the ability of unions to strike. But weighing the equities, we must avoid a strike.
We're going to try to solve this ASAP.
On the Republican side, House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy says he expects the bill to pass, but he also criticizes Democrats for dealing with it the last minute.
If you're passing a bill to force the rail workers to work, how strong is your economy?
Meanwhile, while in Michigan today, President Biden touts the economy, citing what he calls slowing inflation and low unemployment. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
And the Republican Senate leader today hinting at opposing former President Trump's bid for the White House. This after Trump hosted a controversial dinner with what the former president is saying was an uninvited guest. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more on how some Republican lawmakers are scrambling to distance themselves.
Just 2 weeks after former President Trump officially launched his bid for the White House, attacks are mounting. The most recent over controversial dinner guests. Just last Tuesday, Trump hosted at his home Kanye West along with a few of his friends, one of whom is a man by the name of Nick Fuentes, whom many are labeling as a white supremacist. Fuentes denies this label, but despite this, Republicans have been quick to react, distancing themselves from this negative messaging. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell earlier today fell just short of directly targeting and criticizing Trump. Here's a look.
Let me just say that there is no room in the Republican Party for anti-Semitism or white supremacy. And anyone meeting with people advocating that point of view, in my judgment, are highly unlikely to ever be elected President of the United States.
Now, Trump has repeatedly defended himself on Truth Social, saying that he simply didn't know who Fuentes was, which is a comment that was reiterated today by House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy when he was asked about this issue. And McCarthy's reaction is a bit more surprising and interesting than McConnell's. While McConnell has been faced with criticism repeatedly by former President Trump, McCarthy is in a very tight position right now with regards to Republican support. He needs nearly all Republican support in order to take the Speaker's gavel come January. So by, in a way, defending former President Trump here, you can tell he's really trying to hold on to all of that Republican support and not lose any Republican members who may be in support of former President Trump. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
In multiple cities around the world, people are holding rallies to show solidarity with the protesters inside of mainland China. This past weekend, Chinese residents all across the country protested the communist regime's draconian COVID policies. These white sheets of paper have become a symbol of protest in China, and they are spreading. Dozens of protesters gathered in Hong Kong on Monday to show solidarity.
I'm here because I don't quite agree with mainland China's policies on COVID.
Vigils and protests have popped up in a number of cities around the world. In the U.S., protesters gathered outside the State Department in Washington, D.C. Rallies were also held at the University of California, Berkeley, and outside of Columbia University in New York City.
The fact that Chinese and the young people in China have finally stood up to the corrupt and coercive government. For decades, we have been silenced. We have not been able to voice our dissent. But this weekend, what happened this weekend? What happened over the last week has once again, it inspired me.
U.S. senators are also reacting to the protests inside China.
I think we're seeing the Chinese people speak up for more freedom against the COVID lockdown policies. I support that. Against the technology censorship.
And I think these things are going to continue. And I think it's the reaction of the Chinese government should be a wake-up call to the world. These people want to be the most powerful country in the world. If they do that to their own people, what will they do to you?
Protests in China erupted over a deadly apartment fire in the Xinjiang region last week. 10 people were killed in the fire, and the Chinese regime's strict pandemic measures are believed to have blocked the rescue efforts. And now joining us to discuss the protests in China, we have Trevor Loudon, author and expert on communist movements. Trevor Loudon, thank you so much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Trevor, with what we're seeing unfolding in China right now, is this bigger than COVID zero policy, and where do you see this going?
No, I think it is bigger. I think it's very, very encouraging that the people in China are really, this is destroying the whole CCP narrative, that the people are on board with the CCP's agenda, and they've accepted that this is the best way to go. This is way beyond COVID. This is an actual, as you've seen some of the reports, this is an actual pushback against the CCP per se. And it's interesting right now, we've got big anti-communist protests in Brazil, the same in Bolivia, that have gone on for weeks, a big protest against the Iranian regime, which is a sort of theocratic form of communism in itself going on in Iran. So as the screws tighten around the world, the people are rising up and pushing back. And I expect this is really going to rock the CCP regime in China.
Trevor, what should the volume or level of support be for these protesters from democratic countries around the world?
Well, it should be intense. It should be, we should be right there, right beside them. The problem is we've got so many of our political leaders are so compromised by the CCP that the criticism is either very muted or not at all. We've seen the same with the protests in Iran. There's been very little real support from Western governments, when this is a chance to, if those people on the streets had some support from the West, they would topple the mullahs. If the people on the ground in China have significant support from the West, they will carry this on, and we could see the end of the CCP. This is too good a chance to miss, and unfortunately we have too many compromised leaders.
On that note, Trevor, you have a new book out which warns of Chinese Communist Party infiltration, specifically within our own country. If you could, tell us about your new book.
Well, it's two books. It's part 1 and part 2 released together as a set. Security Risk Senators, part 1 and 2. And each book is 400 pages with 50 pages of footnotes, profiling 30 currently serving US senators and detailing their ties to the CCP, to Iran, to Cuba, and to local communist movements. So what we're saying is we've got 30 US senators who are deeply compromised. They are security risks, but they're running every major committee in the US Senate, and they are cooperating with America's enemies in the CCP and Iran and other countries to the detriment of the people. There's a shocking evidence in these books. So I think most people will be blown away when they read the content.
It sounds very fascinating and compelling. Trevor, before I let you go, the CCP is telling folks inside of China that these protests are being provoked by foreign forces. This is a common theme. Has this trick run dry for the CCP?
Well, look, nobody believes them. You know, look, do you think really any foreign entity is going to be in China stirring this up? You know, with the police state that the CCP has? Look, this shows that people would risk their lives. They would get out on the streets, risk their lives against one of the world's most totalitarian regimes. Tells me they are true believers. They have had enough. They've had enough of the suppression, of the lies, of the executions, of the persecution, of the Maoist mass line that's been enforced. And they see this as their shot for freedom. You have to be pretty darn desperate to get out on the streets and confront the CCP when you know that you're putting your life at risk and the lives of your family at risk. So we should be cheering these people on and offering them every bit of moral and political, economic support we can muster, because their fight is our fight. We can bring down the CCP. That won't just be good for us. It'll be good for everybody, the people of China, the people all around the world. Imagine the end of the CCP. It'd be like the end of the Nazi Party, only even better.
Trevor Loudon, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
The HBO documentary about Nancy Pelosi is debuting on December 13th. It was produced and directed by her daughter, Alexandra Pelosi. A documentary team at HBO made up the executive producers and editors. The film is titled Pelosi in the House. It follows the House Speaker through the decades of her career in Congress, from her early years up until the Biden inauguration in 2021. Alexandra Pelosi also filmed events around the Capitol on January 6th. The footage shows Nancy Pelosi and other officials evacuating the Capitol. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.